Digital technologies also function as containers. They store data and information in a variety of forms. And like the city, the computer can be seen as a container of containers, and even more so, the internet as a container of containers. Cities will not suddenly disappear, of course, but they are shattered vessels, the inner city decaying or turned into a mall or theme park, while urban sprawl spills out into the suburbs and exurbs. Ultimately, cyberspace is altering our landscape in a variety of ways, like the city, the nation-state, which McLuhan argued is a product of print culture, is obsolescent. And like the city, the nation-state will not disappear overnight. Given the potential for anarchy, we may not want it to disappear at all. The dream of a homogeneous global state was a product of print culture as well, and it's given way to the reality of heterogeneous transnational networks, including multinational corporations and terrorist networks such as Al-Qaeda. Increasingly more complex and flexible forms of social organization are inevitable, and with them, multiple and overlapping associations may take the place of our contemporary concept of citizenship. This brings me to my seventh bit, which I call the magic 8-ball. Here we go. Know this toy? It's a toy. It looks like an oversized 8-ball. The idea is you ask it a question, turn it upside down, and the answer appears in a little window on the bottom. For example, I could ask, does the audience like my speech? And it could come up, signs point to yes, or my sources say no, or reply hazy, try again. Now, you don't have to be a Harry Potter to look into the magic 8-ball, which for our purposes means looking for patterns in the history of technology and culture. It means analyzing our present situation and extrapolating out to the future. For example, we can observe that many habits that were taken for granted in older media environments are now becoming optional or obsolete. This includes wearing watches, using typewriters, phonographs, tying your shoes, reading the daily newspaper. The same goes for habits such as living in cities, working in offices, going to college, and maintaining a strong sense of affiliation with the nation-state. Our social institutions are products of the previous media environments of speech, writing, and print. They didn't suddenly vanish when electricity was introduced. Instead, we've been witnessing a process of transformation. It's sometimes sudden, sometimes gradual, sometimes involves minor adjustments, sometimes major disruptions and violence. Consider, for example, the radical change in the concepts of the public and the private that we're witnessing. Many have commented on the blurring of the boundaries between the two. Certainly in the US, we see the idea that there are certain rules about how one is to behave in public places. That's given way to a sense that anything goes. It's readily apparent in the way people dress. Articles of clothing once considered private, such as underwear and pajamas, are now considered acceptable for public display. Cell phones are another example, as many people engage in private conversations out in the open, and we then have no choice but to eavesdrop on their private conversations. And at the same time, of course, databases collect information about us, and online our every move leaves digital traces. While some of us are not comfortable with the loss of privacy, others embrace it. And children growing up in this new environment take it for granted. They can't conceive of any other way of life. The result has been a new culture of exhibitionism and self-disclosure, and you can see it in talk shows, in reality programs, and online. A great example of this is the fact, in the US at least, that the diary writing that was once considered the most secret, most private and intimate of activities is now performed online by teenagers in the form of blogs. Certainly the case of the cell phone is revealing. Cell phone puts us in the position of always being on call, but it also gives us immediate access to others in our social and professional networks and strengthens those networks. Our work world intrudes on our home life, follows us when we're on vacation, but our domestic life and personal relationships invade the workplace like never before. Apart from social networks, cell phones constitute an early warning system. You may recall the case of the passengers aboard Flight 93 on September 11, 2001, that they learned about the terrorists' true intentions by the cell phone communication, and they were able to take appropriate action given the limited options open to them. Following 9/11, many of us in the New York metropolitan area felt the need to stay informed in the event of an emergency. I stopped telling my students to turn off their cell phones in class. And telecommunications services offer to fill this need by sending alerts to subscribers' cell phones. That's an admittedly extreme case, but it points to the fact that once you start using a cell phone, you begin to feel naked without one. For example, if you forget or lose your cell phone or the battery runs out, and what if there's an emergency and someone needs to get in touch with me? What if my car breaks down? What if I need help? We're accustomed to living now with a digital safety net that includes cell phones, that also includes global positioning systems that can rapidly pinpoint our location. Services such as OnStar offer us safety and security for our automobiles so that if we're lost, someone is there digitally to give us directions. When we park, there's someone there to keep an eye on the car. If we're incapacitated, say because of an accident, someone's there to call an ambulance. We also have medical alert systems that are used to monitor the elderly at home. If they fall or have a medical problem, the alert service calls an ambulance. But ultimately, aren't we all at risk, young and old? We're all at risk for accident or for a medical problem. Wouldn't we all want to have our life signs monitored 24/7, 365 in case of a medical emergency? You know, pets now have chips implanted so that if your dog runs away, you can find them electronically. How long before we do this with our children so we can find them if they get lost or kidnapped? You know, it's now routine, at least in the US, to have your children fingerprinted for the same reason. Not too long ago, that would be considered an enormous invasion of privacy. How long before we're all expected to have chips implanted, chips that can provide our medical histories, make economic transactions seamless, identify us, monitor us, and track us? This may sound like 1984, George Orwell, but in this 8th digital era, it can easily become as routine as the need for papers. Instead of passports, driver's license, identification cards, it's a chip. Given the very real danger that terrorism poses, regardless of ideology or motivation, given that this is a solution made readily available by digital technologies, privacy just doesn't stand a chance. You don't have to be Harry Potter to see it coming, but you may have to be Harry Houdini to escape it. Now, how many of us will want to? How many of us will want to? When the trade-off for being online all the time and everywhere is enormous empowerment and access to information, services, and communication that would, in effect, be magical. How many of us will want to escape when we're living in a Harry Potter world of wizardry?